Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Financial Aid Night. So I want to introduce this evening's presenter, Dan Robinson from Pace University. Dan has been fantastic to volunteer to do this for us for many years, and he does a super job giving you an orientation to financial aid. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan and say thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. My voice is a little hoarse, but I'm prepared to work my way through it. I got my hot tea, so just in case I need to take a few sips along the way. So there's a lot of important information we're going to be covering tonight. Here are the topics we're going to be discussing regarding financial aid for your children in college. Some of the common terms such as cost of attendance, student aid index, financial need, the types of aid, where it comes from, and the forms that you're going to need to fill out in order for your child to get the financial aid. So the first term we speak about is the cost of attendance. So this is what the advertised price of a school is. So you'll see, anywhere from $40,000 up to $90,000 as a school's cost of attendance. But what you really want to focus on are the direct expenses, the tuition and fees, housing and food. For us old timers, that used to be called room and board, but now it's housing and food. So those are the charges that the schools are going to charge you for your child to attend and possibly live on campus. The other items in the cost of attendance, the books, the transportation, the miscellaneous, these are costs you should expect to incur while your child's in school, but you not get charged for them. So what schools do, they get that cost of attendance figure up so we can make sure we have a large enough number to help, demonstrate financial need. Now, the other component of that is the student aid index. This is determined by completing the FAFSA form, which is the free application for federal student aid. I'll be getting into that in good detail in a few moments. You put in all your financial information, etc. It spits out the SAI, and then schools use that to determine your financial need. Simple math problem. Cost of attendance minus student aid index gives you your need. And that cost of attendance is all items, the direct and the indirect. So what type of financial aid is available? Four main types: scholarships, grants, loans, and work study. So the ones on the right are the free money or gift aid. So that's really what you're trying to achieve with paying for college. Most scholarships are awarded based on a student's merit-based scholarships based on their high school performance and or test scores if they take test scores and if they're required. Other scholarships that schools offer could be talent-based, either athletic talent, theatrical talent, musical, artistic, whatever it might be. But on the admissions application, when students apply to a college, that usually determines their merit-based scholarship based on grades. The other talent-based awards could come at a later date. Some schools may do it up front, but a lot of them do wait a little bit later on to award those because they may still be determining, is that student warranted that scholarship? Did they pass an audition? Did they submit their art portfolio? Did the coaches go out and see them perform on the field? And then before they make the final decision on the talent-based scholarships. Next, we have our grants. Grants are more free money that primarily are based on the student's financial need, usually as determined by, again, that calculation we spoke of and some of the forms that students fill out, whether it's from the federal government, state government, the schools themselves, and you'll see some other outside sources. Next, we have work study. This is kind of confusing of why this is considered financial aid, but if a student's part of the federal work study program and has a job working on campus, when they get paid, it's blind to them, but 75% of what they're receiving is coming from government funds. The federal government provides a pot of money to the school for their work study program. So students who are employed through the program, they'll get their paycheck every month or every 2 weeks, whatever it might be, but they don't realize that a good portion of those funding is coming from the federal government, and that's why it's considered financial aid. And I'm going to touch on student loans in a moment when I talk about the federal government as one of the main sources of aid. As you can see, 5 main sources of financial aid. I'm going to touch on 4 of them right now. The New York State aid, I'm going to wait till later on in the presentation when I discuss the different forms and whatnot are needed for that. So the federal government is the largest source of financial aid across the country. It's determined by filling out that FAFSA form. It's primarily based on need. However, there are 2 awards that are not need-based. Each year, the student must complete the FAFSA as well as the parent. The student and parent complete everything together. And then each of the programs within the federal government has different requirements. Now, the first one being the federal Pell Grant. The federal government determines who is Pell Grant eligible. Schools have no say in this. So when a student completes their FAFSA, they get their SAI. At that point, they'll be told, yes, you're eligible for a Pell Grant and the dollar amount, or no, you're not eligible for the Pell Grant. So it's all based on the FAFSA filing. Next is the SEOG or FSEOG. This is similar to work study, a pot of money received by the school from the federal government to disperse to their neediest Pell Grant recipients only. So if your child's not eligible for the Pell Grant, they will not have an FSEOG grant as well. Schools determine what criteria is used for the SEOG. Sometimes it's just who has the most need. Some schools take into account the student's academic standing, whether or not they filed their forms by certain deadlines, and other financial aid they may receive. If a student's receiving a full scholarship, then the SEOG may not be offered because there's other students who may need it because they don't have as much aid. And that differs from school to school. Next, we have the Teach Grant. This is one of the programs that doesn't really have too much of a need requirement, but it's very different in that colleges and universities have to opt into this program. It's not automatic. It's for students who are looking to be future educators, so they'll be education majors in college, and as long as they maintain that status, and upon graduating, they have to teach in a designated teaching shortage area by the Department of Education for a certain number of years, depending on how long they've received the Teach Grant. If they don't meet all those requirements, it gets paid back to the federal government in the form of a loan. So a lot of schools are hesitant to participate in this program because to try to keep loan debt down. So if your student is looking to be an education major, question you want to ask, do they participate in the Teach Grant program? I touched on work study already, and now we get into the student loans. So first-year students in college are eligible to receive up to $5,500 in the federal direct student loan program. That's broken out into two parts. If the student still has demonstrated need after all the gift aid is awarded, $3,500 of that can be awarded in what's called the subsidized loan. That means while the student's in school and during a 6-month grace period upon graduating, the loan is interest-free. So although we try keeping debt down, if students are offered the subsidized loan, it's not a bad option for families to choose just to keep their out-of-pocket expenses down in the hopes that by the time the student graduates, they could save up enough money to pay most of that or all of that loan off without any interest being charged to that loan. For students who don't demonstrate need, or if they have a little bit of room left after the initial $3,500, there was the unsubsidized loan. Same rules apply. The student doesn't have to start paying it back until 6 months after they graduate, but interest does start accruing once that loan is dispersed. So they'll get statements from their lender, usually 3 or 4 times a year, telling them what the outstanding interest is, and if they choose to pay it, how to go about paying it. They are not responsible to pay anything while in college. So all that interest would capitalize at the time of repayment, 4.5 years down the line. And finally, we have the Direct Plus. Plus is a parent loan for undergraduate students. So this is a loan that U.S. parents could take out on the student's behalf to help bridge the gap after all aid is awarded if there's still a balance due. Now, there's good and bad in the Plus. We'll start with the good. It's a very simple credit check loan where they look at your 90-day credit history. If there's no bankruptcies, charge-offs, major delinquencies, there's a good chance you're getting the loan. They don't look at your income. They don't look at your debt. They don't look at if you're even working. It's just a quick snapshot of your 90-day credit report. That's the good. It's fairly simple to get. Currently, the interest rate on the Plus is a little over 9%, and there's a 4.25% origination fee. So if you need $10,000, you're not getting $10,000. You're getting $9,700, whatever it works out to be. But you are paying back the full $10,000. So it's a good last resort for families where if they have no other means of paying and they need to get something done quickly, it's something that's there for them if the parents, if they choose. But again, there usually are better options. As I mentioned, New York State, I'm going to go over this in a little while, in a little more detail. The next source of aid is the colleges themselves, especially private colleges and universities. They offer a significant amount of aid, both in merit and need-based funds, using the different forms, primarily the FAFSA, but there are 2 other forms. There's another form called the CHHS profile, and some schools have their own institutional applications as well. Each school usually has a deadline of when these forms need to be completed. As I mentioned, most of the merit-based scholarships are based on the admissions application, not necessarily the financial aid, but the need part is based on the financial aid forms. Some schools also have their own self-help aid, but not many of them these days. They may have their own work study program, but they usually don't have too many loans any longer. Next, we have the private sources. So this is where you guys get to do a little bit of homework. You kind of start looking to see what is available on the outside world for your child to attend college. If there are any children here tonight, for time to you do a little bit of homework as well. Check around in the community. Are there any businesses, churches, civic organizations? If there's like a chamber of commerce, check with them to find out. You have a graduating senior. Are there any scholarships available? I know some of them are handled through like the Navion system in the guidance office as well, but it could be others that they may not be aware of, or that they don't participate through that program. They do it on their own. Example is my daughter 2 years ago when she graduated high school. She played CYO basketball, since third grade. She got a $200 scholarship from the CYO program, because she applied for it and she, met the criteria. So little things like that. It may not be a lot of money, but it does add up. Most of them have deadlines, and most of them have either a form or an essay for the student to do. If this does require an essay or even just a form, I'd recommend making sure everything's double checked before the student submits it. I said, as having a college student, I know they don't write the same way we were taught to write. Capitalization and punctuation is not that important to them, but on these type of applications, it needs to be. So you may want to give it a glance before they hit submit on these applications. And again, start researching now. A lot of them are not available until the new year, but again, you can see what's available. And final source we're going to talk about are employers, both for the student and parent. You as a parent, you want to check with your benefits department. If you belong to a union, talk to your union chief to find out, are there any education benefits for your child to attend college? Worst they could say is no. If there are, great. You may be able to get an extra, $500,000, whatever it might be, through that program. If your child is working at a bigger company, like say like the CVS's, the McDonald's, the ShopRites of the world, and when they're in college, they're going to continue working for those companies, they may have something available. We've heard of students getting aid from their employer because they continued working throughout college, that they gave them a little bit towards their college education. So again, have your child ask their employer if they're working and to see if there's anything that could help you keep your costs down. So where are we at in the process now? There is a tool out there for everybody to use that's called the Student Aid Estimator on the federal government website. Studentaid.gov is everything federal financial aid. And I'm going to be referring to that site often this evening. It'll give you what your estimated SAI by you putting in the data yourself. It's not the FAFSA, it's not an official form. It's just, again, a tool that you can use to see approximately what your SAI is going to be while you wait to file the FAFSA. It's, you need some income information from your 2023 tax return, some asset information, and you put it all in there, and it'll spit out your SAI and whether or not you're potentially eligible for the Pell Grant, or the student is. So I've mentioned the FAFSA a few times tonight. Free application for federal student aid. First word being free. You do not have to pay to file this form, and you should not pay anyone to file the form for you. If there's anyone here tonight who had to fill out the FAFSA years ago, it was a little more daunting, and a lot of families said, "Oh, it's like filling out taxes. I'm going to pay someone to do it." It's nothing like that anymore. The simplification they put into place this past year, despite having trouble rolling it out, has caused the FAFSA to be beyond easy. It's down to the point where families can get it filled out within 15 to 20 minutes. That's how simple it is. What it does, it collects data from the student and parent, demographic and financial, calculates the SAI, and then it's again, that's offered to the school then, and then students can fill it out online, preferably online, and it's available currently in English and Spanish. They're supposed to expand the languages on it, but they have not done so yet. So prior years would be saying, go home this weekend, or, this weekend, go home and do your FAFSA because it's available. However, it is delayed until December 1st. Now, if your child's attending certain schools, looking to attend certain schools across the country, they have started doing some beta testing at certain schools. And if your child's attending one of those schools, they may be invited to do their FAFSA before December 1st, and that's perfectly fine. But for the most general population, December 1 is when it's going to become available. So check the colleges your child's looking to attend. They do have deadlines, priority deadlines for filing the FAFSA. It's not, it's a priority date, not a final deadline. So you want to make sure you check those to make sure you maximize all the aid that's available. What you can do now, and I recommend doing as soon as possible, is obtaining what's called an FSA ID. This is your electronic signature for studentaid.gov. Every student needs their own FSA ID, and parents need their own FSA ID. Now, if you've been through the financial aid process before with other children, you probably have your ID. If you forget the password, it'll give you an option to, answer the challenge questions. Anyone who has the password, they'll get the text with the code to put in. What's needed to create the password is your standard demographics, name, address, phone number, social security number, date of birth, a valid cell phone number, and email address. So when your child is creating the FSA ID, their email address should not be their high school email address. If they haven't created their own on, Yahoo, Gmail, whatever it might be, they need an email other than their high school email address when they create it. Each ID needs its own unique email address, and preferably cell phone. Sometimes, parents share cell phones. That's usually allowed, but the student's cell phone has to be different from the parent's cell phone. So when you log into studentaid.gov and click you want to apply for the FAFSA, it's going to look something like this. The screen for 2025-26 is not yet available for the general public, but the dates will change on there. And you would click Start New Form, a little blue box up there, and it'll bring you to this page. It gives you the option for the parent to complete your section prior to the student doing their section. It's not recommended, though. The best course of action is for the student to complete their information and for then the parent to log in with their ID to complete theirs. But it can be done in reverse. I actually did that last year as a test just to see if it worked, and it worked out fine, but it's not recommended. So the FAFSA needs to be completed by the student. It's their form. However, the FAFSA also has parent contributors. So to determine who is the parent contributor, a couple simple explanations, as simple as it could be, because it does get a little tricky. If the student lives with both biological parents and they're married and they file taxes jointly, then there's one parent contributor. So the student fills out their portion, the parent fills out their portion, one parent. They list the other parent's name and social security number, but that other parent does not have to fill anything out. So that's the cleanest and easiest way. Now, if the parents are living together but file taxes separately, then both parents are contributors on the FAFSA. Both have to go in and put their information in. Now, if the situation where the parents are separated, it's the parent that provides more financial support for the student, even if the student does not live with that parent. So that's a change from prior years. So again, it's the parent that provides more financial support. Now, if that parent is remarried and they file taxes jointly with their new spouse, then again, it's just the student and their parent. But if that parent's remarried and files taxes separately from their new spouse, the step-parent's information is also needed on the FAFSA. But if it's only one parent, if the separated parent is not remarried, then it's only the two people, the student and that parent that provides support. The other parent's information would not be needed, the other biological parent. So what makes the FAFSA so easy and why you don't need to pay anyone to fill it out for you is this. It's the Future Act of the Direct Data Exchange. What this does, it allows your federal tax information to be transferred directly from the IRS to the Department of Education to populate the necessary fields on the FAFSA. The student and parent must consent to do this. If they don't consent, then the FAFSA will not get processed. So it's really, you have to do it. In other words, if you want the FAFSA processed. Most of the information transfers over. It eliminates a lot of errors. And it could actually say this year, once they got the FAFSA up and running, this was really not an issue at all. A lot of the issues they had, this was not one of them. There is a PDF FAFSA that may be necessary in situations where a family may not be able to get an FSA ID for some reason. Please do not do a paper FAFSA if you do not have to. We have students this year who filed paper FAFSAs in March and April that have not yet been processed by the Department of Education. So there is a long delay in getting them processed. That's one of the problems they're still having is the paper FAFSA. So what information is needed from the student? This is very similar to the parents' information as well. They're going to confirm their identity and their contact information. They're going to give their consent to have that federal tax information transferred over. They're going to give their marital status. Hopefully coming out of high school, that'll be single. Their college plans. Want to make sure they don't choose the wrong one. The option is going to be either they're going to be going for their first bachelor's degree or first associate's degree. See, a number of students make the mistake of choosing graduate degree because they think they graduated high school, but that's not the case. It's either first bachelor's or first associate's degree. And if the student has any personal or unusual circumstances. Now, this is directly tied to the dependency status of the student. All our children are our own we're legal guardians of our own children. However, if the student's under a situation where they're under a court-appointed legal guardianship, so someone other than the biological parents are taking care of that child determined by the courts, they may be considered independent of their parents and of their legal guardian. Now, if the student's adopted, that's treated the same as biological parents. The students in foster care, that is not. They are considered independent. Other unusual circumstances is if the student is an orphan or ward of the court, both biological parents are deceased, if they're at risk of homelessness. If the student answers any of these questions in the positive, the student will be considered provisionally independent. What will happen then is each of the schools that the student applies to will be reaching out to the student to confirm that, yes, they are truly independent and would need backup documentation for audit purposes. But if the student is in the situation where they're under a legal guardianship or foster care or an orphan, schools will do everything in their power to work with that student to get them through the process. So the next step is for the student to provide information on what parent is going to be completing the FAFSA. So the student's going to have to enter the parent's social security number, date of birth, and email address. So it's the email address that's on the parent's FSA ID that gets entered here. So upon the student completing their FAFSA, the parent will get an invitation. So other information is needed from the student. Their demographic information. A lot of this is going to pre-populate based on the logging in through the FSA ID. They make sure it's correct. Their citizenship status. They have to choose whether they're a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Eligible non-citizens is anyone who has a green card and certain asylum statuses that can file the FAFSA. Any other students would not be able to complete the FAFSA, unfortunately. For statistical purposes, the federal government, and some schools use this as well, need to determine what is the parent's highest grade level. Because there's a big push to give extra assistance, not financially per se, but more just guidance along the way for first-generation college students. And the federal government likes to keep those statistics each year as well to see how many first-generation students are going to college. Now, the next one, unfortunately, if the student lost a parent in the line of duty, either fire, police, military, this is when the student could be eligible for a full Pell Grant regardless of income. This is the other piece of federal aid that has no financial tie-in. Students who meet this criteria, they'll have to provide proof to the school, of course, that they lost a parent in the line of duty. They'll be a recipient of a full Pell Grant each year. Then it'll ask for the student's high school information. They put it in the state, they put it in the town, the high school pops up. Just make sure be careful. We're going to choose the right high school because every once in a while, being just neighboring high schools, sometimes they'll appear as well. Then you just click Croton and you'll be good to go. As far as the student's tax information, financial information, that's going to carry over directly from the IRS, even if they didn't file taxes. And a lot of high school students don't. So that information will get carried over saying that this student did not file taxes, and that's perfectly fine. That's acceptable. And then it'll ask me questions about the student's assets, what they have in their cash savings checking, if they own a farm or a business, if they have any investments. I'm going to get into assets in a couple moments when I get to the parent section. So at that point, the student gets to do the fun part and list all the colleges they want the FAFSA to go to. Students can list up to 20 colleges at one time. So students completing their FAFSA, they list their 20 schools. It's completed. They confirm with the schools that they got their copy of it. If they need to add more schools, they need to go start over doing not a new form, but make a correction or an update in the existing form. And at that point, they'll remove some of the schools and put new ones on and juggle as much as you have to juggle. Hopefully, it's not more than 40 schools. 20 is more than enough. Give them an opportunity to review all the information. If anything's wrong, they can go back and make a correction, and then they type in their name as their signature. At this point, you as the parent will get an email saying your child has completed their FAFSA. Please click here to go to studentaid.gov to complete your section. It may go into your spam. So what I recommend when you're filing the FAFSA for the first time with your student, do it together. Carve out an hour. You're not going to need an hour per se. For the FAFSA, definitely, you're not going to need an hour. But have your child sitting next to you, do it together. Do not do the FAFSA on a mobile device. A laptop, a computer, a tablet is fine. Do not use a phone. Some of the information doesn't carry over properly. As we all know, Apple doesn't play well with others, so use a computer or laptop. So you'll get that invitation as the parent. You'll log in. You'll confirm your contact and identity information. You'll give your consent to have your tax information moved over, and it's going to ask you your marital status. And by answering that, it's going to ask you, if you say married, it'll ask if you filed taxes jointly, and the subsequent questions. If you answer separated, unmarried, single, it'll ask if there's a spouse involved. So just a couple follow-up simple questions, yes or no. And the parent's state of legal residence. Most likely it's going to be the same as the students, but if it's in that situation where the parents are separated and the parent that provides more financial support may not live in New York, that's where it gets picked up on this entry on the FAFSA. Now, some of the different questions it's going to ask the parent is whether or not you received any federal benefits such as WIC or SNAP, not the dollar amount, not how much you got, not how many times you got it. It's a yes or no question whether or not you got it in the past 2 years. That helps determine the calculation the government uses for the SAI. It's going to ask your tax filing status. One of the items you're able to change is the family size and number in college. What the form does, it pulls over the number of exemptions on your tax return. So in your household, most likely it matches the number of exemptions. However, there may be someone in your household you're providing support for that you don't claim on your taxes. Could be one of your parents, one of your siblings, a niece, a nephew, a friend of the family that you're taking care of that's not on your taxes. You could change this figure on the FAFSA. So if you normally have, I'll go the old, show my age, the old Beaver Cleaver, mom, dad, Wally and the Beav, it's four exemptions. But again, if you have your parent living with you, it could be a fifth person or a sixth person. So you can change that figure. Again, all the tax information will carry over. If you have a rollover from an IRA or a retirement fund, they'll give you a pop-up here to say, is any of your withdrawal a rollover? It doesn't pick up the rollover amount, just the distribution of it. So if you do have a withdrawal from an IRA or a retirement fund, and there was a rollover, you're going to need to manually enter that rollover figure. This is something you cannot go back and correct. If you do miss the question, you'd have to provide the documentation to one of the schools to go in and make the correction for you. Now, assets for the parent. Same as the student, any money you have in your cash, savings, checking at the end of the month after you pay your bills is what they're looking for. It's as of the day you file the FAFSA, but really what's normally in there at the end of the month. And as I like to joke, it cannot be a negative number. 0 is as low as you can go. If you own a business, you have to report the value of that business minus any debt you have on that. Now, we often get the question, how do you determine the value of the business? And the answer we got from the Department of Education was, if you were to put that business on the market today, what would you be selling it for? And then you subtract out any physical debt you have on it, equipment, buildings, so on and so forth. You'd subtract that, and that would be the value of your business. If you're in a partnership, you take, whatever that value minus debt is and split it by whether it's 2 or 3, however many partners you have. Same as if you have an investment farm. I know there's not too many farms in Westchester County, but you might have one somewhere upstate. It'd be the same thing, the value minus any debt. You also report any UGMA or UTMA accounts. This would be for the student. If the student is the owner, they report that as an asset. If the student's not the owner of the account, they're just a custodian on it, then it's not reported. Traditional investments, stocks, bonds, CDs, that all gets reported, both either as a student or parent. And then finally, the 529. Actually, I have one other one. 529 plans. The student that if the student that's filing the FAFSA has a 529 plan that's held by either the student or the parent, it gets reported as an asset for the parent, not for the student. If the 529 is held outside of your household, then it does not get reported at all. So if that aunt or an uncle or a grandparent holds it, great, it doesn't get reported. The other item to report as an asset is any investment real estate. The home you live in is not an asset. It is a vacation home you may have or a building that you may own as rental income. It's the value of that minus any debt you would have it. And again, if you're unsure of the value, we've been told go on to Zillow and look at the value of it, put in the address and see what the value comes up as, and that's what you would use. What you don't include in an asset, as I mentioned, the primary resident is not an asset. The UGMA, UTMAs, if the student's custodial, is not an asset. Now, the two most important ones, the value of your life insurance and the value of your retirement plan, your 401k, 403b. Those are not assets. That's your money for retirement, not for your child's education. And then if the other parent needs to enter information, this is where it would go. So upon completing or entering all your information, you get to review it. You type in your name, you sign it. If another parent has to provide information at this point, they'll get the email to log in. Otherwise, you get this congratulations. I'm going to take a quick break to answer any questions that are out there, and then we'll jump back in.
Dan, we had a few questions come in on chat. First one was, do both parents need separate ID numbers? I assume that's the FSA ID.
Correct. Each parent needs their own FSA ID. Even if they're filing taxes jointly, each parent needs their own FSA ID. Only one parent may be the contributor on the FAFSA, but I always recommend both parents do get the FSA ID just to have it. It doesn't hurt to have it. If you're ever interested also in taking out that the parent loan, you need it for that as well.
Okay, thank you. The second question is regarding the parent's education status. Is that for the parent that is filling out, or do you include both parents' education levels?
This is a question on the student's portion of the FAFSA, so it'll ask for the student's parents' educational. I believe even if the parents are separated, I still believe it asks for both parents' status. And one of the answers is I don't know. So if the student's unsure, they could just answer I don't know.
Okay, and the last question here, for a rollover of IRA, do you mean if you receive an annual distribution?
The way it appears on the tax return, I can't remember the exact line numbers, but there's like a 16A, a 16B, and the amount that's reported on the final line on the tax return is 16A minus 16B, and then the taxable amounts reported. The untaxable amount is what goes on the FAFSA. So if that untaxable amount is a rollover, then it gets backed out as long as you enter that information. So if you're getting an annual distribution and it's not a rollover, then it's counted as untaxed income on the FAFSA.
We had one more question come in.
Yep.
It was recommended from College Aid Pro that you look up the price of your house on Zillow, then subtract 20%, being equivalent to a quick sale price. Is that true?
The value of the home, the business, the investment property, the business, the farm, it's basically an honor system. So rarely was someone going to go back and check to say, oh, you put your investment property valued at 120,000, but I see it's in the Hamptons. That's not possible. Most schools, I could be honest with you, do not have the staff to dig that deep. So as long as it's a reasonable amount, whether you want to reduce it by 20% because of commission and everything else involved, that's fine. But it's really kind of a close estimate of what it would be if you were to sell it, in the next, month or so.
Great. And then that was the last of the questions.
All right, so we'll move along. So after you get the parents done, just this other considerations. It talks about the consent, and again, it allows you the parent to complete the FAFSA prior to the student. I actually have to remove this slide. I don't like it. Let's talk about family size. Again, the one figure you could change. This is just who's considered part of the household. It's the student, the parents, other children in the household. You say you may have a child that came back to live with you. They don't claim on your taxes. You would include them if you're providing support. And again, anyone else that's in your household, aunts, uncles, parents, yourselves, etc. When the student goes back onto fsstudentaid.gov, they'll see on their dashboard their submission summary. It'll tell them the date it was filed, when it was processed. Normal processing time online is 24 to 48 hours. Come December 1st, it'll probably be closer to 48 hours. By January 15th, it'll probably be 2 or 3 hours. So after the initial influx, they get processed very quickly. It'll go over what the next steps for the student are, information about the schools that was sent to, just for kind of reviewing purposes. So if the student does have to go back and say, I have to add schools, they'll be able to see what information's been sent already. You could print this, so you could, most likely save it as a PDF. Making corrections. There should be very few corrections to make. The biggest one would be really more not correction, but changing the schools, because if there's more than 20, to go back in and add schools. Some documentation, like I said, if it's you missed the rollover, the college and university will have to make that correction on your behalf. Now, as you can see, the FAFSA doesn't take into account everyday life. So if anything's different from what's on your 2023 tax return to where you're at now, that could be considered a special circumstance, which is different from the unusual circumstance. Unusual is just for the student's dependency status. Special means there's something that's happening in your life that needs to be explained. And if you fall into that boat, what you'll need to do is submit a letter, no documentation, just a letter explaining the situation to each of the schools your child's applying to. You will do this after the FAFSA is filed. Do not do it beforehand. The schools will then reach out and say, okay, we see what your issue is. One school may say, we could help you out, and now send the following documentation. Another school may say, unfortunately, we're not able to assist you further. We're going to go what's on the FAFSA and leave it at that. And that's within the school's rights. Just because one school says yes, it doesn't force another school to say yes. So, all we're required to do is allow you to submit that request for special circumstances. Now, the main special circumstances that we see, this is pretty much what they are. Of course, if a student loses a parent that passes away, all schools will make accommodations for that. They'll collect the death certificate. They'll collect some tax documents to back out parent information. That's kind of standard across the board. The other big one is if a parent loses a job. If again, we're using 2023 tax returns, parents' employment status might have changed since then. If they involuntarily lost their job, most schools will say, okay, provide us, proof of unemployment, separation from your employer, etc., and whatever other documentation they're going to use to update the data on the FAFSA. You don't do any of the updating, we do the updating, but we need an audit trail. So we're going to ask for significant documentation in order to do so. Now, the loss or reduction of employment, so you're still working, but you're making less money. This is very 50-50 as far as it goes with schools. Some schools will say, you know what, you're working for less money, but you're working. So any changes in your income will be reflected in next year's FAFSA or the following year's FAFSA, and they won't pursue it further. Some schools will say, okay, send us the data. They'll see if we can, if we make adjustments, will it benefit you? And it could also result in the amount, it could be because, or not result, it could be determined by the amount of the loss. If you went from making $200,000 a year to $150,000 a year, it's not going to make a big difference on the FAFSA. If you went from making $200,000 a year down to $80,000, that's a big difference. So schools may look at that, or they may not look at the bigger ones. So just something to consider. Again, All of these will require documentation, documentation, documentation. If you have any medical expenses that are not covered by insurance, this is a tricky one because sometimes this lingers on for a long time, as we all know, where you're waiting for insurance to cover something. Are they going to cover it? Do you pay it? Do you not pay it? Or if you do pay it, do you get reimbursed? So we need to see proof of payment to the medical provider. We need bills from the medical provider. We need kind of everything in order to go about that. Most schools use the standard percentage that's used for the tax returns, 11.5% over your adjusted gross income, to be considered for a special circumstance. Same with extraordinary dependent care or even extraordinary parental care. If you have a student who has special needs and they're in special programs that you're paying for out of pocket, you have a parent who's in an assisted living facility that you're paying for. Their insurance isn't paying for it. You're paying for it out of your pocket. Schools will look at that to see if they could consider making any adjustments. Same as if you have any children in a non-public school. That's, again, not all schools honor that. The additional family members in college is a little tricky. This is new because it's a change in the FAFSA where it used to be considered, it no longer is. So some schools will still look at that. Many do not, unless it's a significant change. Where, if you have your first child in college and your quadruplets are going this year, now you have 5. Schools may take that into account more than just having 2 in college. So that's each school does it individually. Again, you would send the letter off explaining your situation, and they would let you know whether they'll pursue it. Then finally, divorce or separation. From the time you filed your taxes in 2023, has your marital status changed? This would require significant documentation. If it's a divorce, it's pretty simple. You have a legal document from the courts. You're divorced. It's clean cut. Separation isn't necessarily as simple. What most schools will need, they'll need proof of separate residence, meaning utility bills in both parents' names at different residents, proof that your paycheck is, the address on your paycheck's going to different residents, etc. So it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of back and forth. Unfortunately, we've had over the years, all schools, not just where I am, parents trying to say, we're going to say we're separated to get more financial aid. If they're not truly separated, we find out. It's something that's easy enough to notice. We get many requests. They'll say we're separated. We'll do a little digging and we'll find out. They'll say we're separated, but we're still living in the same house. Well, guess what? For financial aid, you're not separated. You may not file taxes together, but you're both in the same household. You're contributing to the student the same. We need both parents' information. So if you are in a situation where you are separated or divorced since filing taxes, send the explanation in. But any documentation beyond that, it could be a bit of back and forth with the school. You need a little patience. Okay, finally circling back to the New York State aid. So students who live in New York State and their parents for at least 1 year could be considered eligible for aid from New York State for college. They both have to be residents of New York State for 1 year, and a student must attend a school within New York State. Each of the programs have their own specific criteria. I'm going to go over 4 programs tonight, with the first one being the largest one that's been around forever, which I received TAP when I was in college, however many decades ago that might have been. It's the tuition assistance plan. Students must file the FAFSA. It's for undergraduate students only. The maximum award is $56.65. The minimum award is $1,000. It can be used for full-time as well as part-time study. So if your child saying, I'm not sure if I really want college, I'm just going to go to WCC, take a couple classes, you know what? They could still possibly get aid from New York State for that. If the family's income is less than $125,000 per year, the student would qualify for aid. Now, the cost of the school comes into play, as well as whether they're full-time or part-time. It's a sliding scale. If your income is $120,000, the student's going to get the $1,000 minimum. They're not going to get the $56.65. But again, New York State does have a separate application that needs to be filed. This will take a little bit longer than the FAFSA. You will need your New York State tax return on hand as you're doing this. Again, it's in the student's name, but it has a parent portion as well. Parent doesn't sign on separate. It's all one form, but all has to be done at the same time. Now, New York State has three other programs that are most prevalent in New York State. The first being the Excelsior Scholarship. This is the one that came into existence now probably about 8 or 9 years ago, where families who make less than $125,000 in New York State net taxable income, and a student attends a SUNY or CUNY school, they'll have free tuition while they attend. So only tuition, not the housing and food, not the fees, just strictly tuition. Now, what's required to keep this award and so it doesn't turn into a loan? The student must maintain or must complete a minimum of 30 credit hours per academic year, so roughly 15 credits per semester, in order to maintain the Excelsior Scholarship each year moving forward. And the parents need to continue to make less than $125,000. Upon graduating, for every year the student received the Excelsior Scholarship, they must live and work in New York State. So in Westchester County, you're not far from the Connecticut border. Your child may get a great job offer in Danbury or Stamford or Greenwich. If they take that job and they receive the Excelsior Scholarship, they now have to pay that back to New York State as an interest-free loan, which is nice. At least it's interest-free. So it could mean the child takes a job in New York State, comes back to live with you for another 4 years after graduating, just to avoid paying back the Excelsior Scholarship. Next is the Enhanced Tuition Award. This was designed for the private colleges and universities in New York. Not all schools participate. It is voluntary, and fewer and fewer schools participate on a yearly basis. All the criteria as far as income, academics on the back end is the same as Excelsior. The other big difference is the maximum award through the ETA is $6,000 in total New York State aid. So if your child's getting a TAP award for $4,000, the most they'll get out of ETA is an additional $2,000. So for that reason and the administrative overhead to run the program and follow up with all the students, a lot of schools have decided that it's not worth their while to participate. It's almost easier to give the students their own grant money as opposed to dealing with all the red tape of the state system and reporting and everything else. But if your child is looking at one of the private colleges in New York, ask if they participate in ETA. It is a separate application that needs to be completed with New York State, and it usually becomes available in January or February. Final New York State program is the New York State STEM. This is not a financial-based program. This is strictly academic. For students who finish in the top 10% of the class and are going to be a STEM major at a SUNY or CUNY school, they get a full tuition scholarship. The back end is all the same, and the academics are all the same as the other two, living and working in New York, completing the credits. This one has a higher GPA requirement as well. So if they're looking to be a science, technology, engineering, or mathematics major at a SUNY or CUNY, they can get a free tuition. But again, this is strictly academic. I'm not sure if you do ranking at Croton. If not, New York State does have a way of determining if the student would be considered in the top 10% of the class. New York State does have a couple other awards, such as, for students who are in the military, or if their parents were in the military, we'll do like a GI Bill type of award, as well as if the student's parent became permanently disabled in the line of duty. They have some scholarships for that as well as also World Trade Center scholarships. Final form I'm going to speak to tonight is the CSS profile. I always throw the disclaimer out there. In my almost 30 plus years of doing this, I've never worked at a school that required the profile, but more schools are starting to go this route because of the FAFSA issues last year. It's an additional application that costs $25 to file for the first school and $10 for each additional school. It collects more detailed information than the FAFSA. All that tax information is required, but it will look at the value of the home. It'll look at your mortgage. It'll ask whether you have a car, if there's a loan on the car. If the parents are separated, it may ask for the parent that's not on the FAFSA. It'll ask for their information as well for both biological parents or both adoptive parents. So it digs a lot deeper as far as both income and for debt. It's used primarily at the more selective colleges. Locally, it's kind of like the Fordhams, the Fairfields of the world, and Boston University, the Ivies, etc. They use it to determine, can they spend their own money, like they have their endowment funds, their donated funds, who's eligible to receive them. They want a cleaner picture, a more rounded picture than the FAFSA provides. So if your child's looking at any of those schools, you want to make sure they meet the deadlines of filing the profile. It's administered through the College Board. If you go to their website, they have a section on the profile. It lists all the schools that the profile is required for. So you could search it, you could put it in alphabetical search, it'll list it for you. If you want to search just New York, just Connecticut, whatever it might be, it'll list all those schools for you. They have strict deadlines as well. This form is currently open. This is one that did open 2 weeks ago. It is available for parents to complete. I did this session at a high school a few weeks ago in person, and the one parent, when I brought this up, just shook his head. He said, "This form's a beast." Again, I've never filled it out, but it is more daunting than the FAFSA, especially since the improvements to the FAFSA. So this will take you a little more time to complete if necessary. So just a little over 50 minutes. We got through everything on my presentation. If you have questions, please enter them in the chat. I will be more than willing to answer those.
We had one a little while ago, Dan, asking, is there any income level past which there is little to no benefit for filing the FAFSA?
There's no magic number tied to the FAFSA, because what it looks at is, in addition to income and assets, it looks like how many people are in the household, and to determine that SAI. This year, the new calculations they put out, we saw families making upwards of $200,000 that still got a Pell Grant, where in the past that would never happen. So I always tell families, all it's going to take you really to fill out the FAFSA is approximately 20 minutes of your time, maybe a half an hour. So you want to make sure, and some schools also require the FAFSA. If they're going to give you any piece of aid, including scholarships, they may require the FAFSA. I know a lot of schools that offer athletic scholarships, the FAFSA is a requirement before they offer the scholarship. So check with the school to find out if it's a requirement for anything. Again, it doesn't take too much time to fill out. It's very simple now. Like I said, as someone who's in this business, I completed my daughter's last year throughout the craziness of it. My daughter and I completed her FAFSA, both sections, in 15 minutes. That's how simple it was. And I've helped many parents through online sessions as well as in-person sessions where they get to the end, they'll ask, "What's next?" I'm gonna go, "You're done." And they'll be like, "What do you mean I'm done? Why did it not take so few amount of time?" It's because it's so simple. So I recommend, all students complete the FAFSA. Parent may want that parent loan down the line. The student may decide, "I want to go study abroad," and you don't have money to pay for it. They could take that $3,500 loan that they wouldn't be able to if they didn't file the FAFSA to help pay their study abroad fees. So it's good to file, but there's no magic number tied to it.
All right, another question that came in, for the CSS profile, should the contributor parent complete this form, or should it be the custodial parent if they're different from the contributor parent?
The profile still uses the custodial parent. However, many schools require both parents. If it's a separation situation, many schools require both parents' information, even though the non-custodial parents' information is also required for many schools. So it's usually both, but primarily it is the custodial parent.
Okay, and then last thing I can add, and for our school, we don't rank our class, meaning we don't publicly report any ranking. But for someone who is applying for a scholarship that requires to know if they're in the top 10%, we can confirm that for the purpose of applying for the scholarship. So they would just reach out to the counseling office for that.
And one of the questions for you, Mark, scholarships within school, they become available in the new year?
Scholarships for in Croat?
Right, within the ones that we through Naviance or through, is there anything through the guidance office that you offer?
There's quite a few scholarships. And in fact, every year we meet with the senior class and they join a Google Classroom that has all of our local scholarships listed that they can apply for. There's quite a bit of money that's on the table there. And I can tell you, every year, some of those scholarships don't have any applicants, and there's money left on the table. So, really would encourage your children to apply for all the local scholarships. A couple more questions that that came in. What about low income? For example, one parent, one student, and $40,000 to $50,000 income. What's the best option for financial aid?
First is filing the FAFSA, no question. It's that based on that information is, I would say, a very good chance that student would be eligible for the maximum Pell Grant, which means they'll receive maximum aid from any school they attend. But check with the schools the student's applying to find out if the profile is needed. If your child's looking at a school in New York State, make sure you complete the New York State application as well. The New York State application will open up on December 1st, the same as the FAFSA.
And then for divorced parents, what is the definition of provides financial support? As in which parent provides more financial support?
Right, and this is tricky because this is something that changed last year. And way it's best explained to us by the Department of Education is if the student, regardless of who the student lives with, which parent provides more financial support, even if the student doesn't live with that parent. So if student lives with parent A, who earns $100,000 a year, parent B earns $50,000 a year, but parent A is paying child support to parent B. Parent B may be the more provide more financial support. It gets a little tricky. The Department of Ed did come out recently with a new link. I'm going to see, if you don't mind, if I could access this for you. Just give me one moment. I know I'm still sharing my screen, but this is a valuable tool that they just put out, is who counts as the parent for the FAFSA. So to make sure you could still see it. It is loading. Can you see this form?
We can see it, yes.
Okay. So you put in the name again. You're not entering anywhere. So if you just do like B and C, and it says if the student only has one legal parent, that's the case, but then it asks a series of questions. Are they married to each other? Yes or no? If you say no, do the B and D live together? No. So it goes through the series of questions and who provides more financial support. And here it says if both parents provide the exact same amount, it's the parent with the greater income and assets. And if it's still identical at that point, then choose either parent. And this could change from year to year. The parent listed on the FAFSA the first year could change in year 2 because of the financial support piece. But this is an excellent tool for this situation.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, obviously.
Yes.
Let's see, to answer the next question, has the meeting with the students happened? I think we're referring back to the meeting with seniors to talk about scholarships. That has not happened yet. I want to say that we usually do that late January, early February, maybe. I don't have access to my calendar because I'm hosting this meeting, but one of my colleagues might want to chime in to when we did that last year, if they have that.
Yeah, Mark, we haven't set a date yet for that. But we do a whole senior meeting, and then we do send an alert out to the parents as well after that meeting has happened.
So parents, look for that alert.
Yeah, it is in the winter, February, early February, to the end of February. I also just wanted to just make a note too that we have on the seniors have access to a senior class Google Classroom, where we have a section for local scholarships that we're made aware of, which is separate from our Croton Harmon High School scholarship program. So as we get scholarships for, through the local community, we will notify the students through the senior class Google Classroom as well.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, it's important to realize that, when we talk about local scholarships, we have a committee at school that goes through the selection process for those. But there are many other scholarships through local organizations and all other money that's available to the community. And the school would have nothing to do with those, but when we become aware of them, we list them.
I see one other question regarding the rules around multiple siblings in college at the same time. The FAFSA does ask how many students are in college. However, it's no longer part of their calculation. In the past, it was. So some schools have put something in place to address that, despite the federal government saying it's something we should not be doing, but we still have the right to do so if we choose to. So each school will make that determination. If there is a sibling in college, there usually is a form that needs to be completed. Sometimes it needs to be completed by the school that the other child's attending. So this is something a lot of schools don't take the parents on their word for. There's actually a form they'll send out saying, okay, my son Johnny's at my school. He listed his sister Jane at your school. Please confirm that information. So each school handles that a little differently.
Right. I don't see other questions in the chat at this point, and if that's right, we may have gotten everybody out in time for the Mets game.
Yes, we got a good half hour to get ready.
Dan, thanks so much for your help and spending the time going through all this with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for everyone coming out tonight, and good luck with the college process.